This is Keys to the Shop, live interviews from the floor of Coffee Fest Anaheim 2023, Part 1. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for this show, and thank you so much for tuning in to this very special live interviews from the show floor episode, specifically the show floor of Coffee Fest trade show, where I am frequently a speaker and a judge, and also get to interview presenters from the educational lineup at Coffee Fest. Now, if you're not familiar with Coffee Fest is a trade show and event for education and resourcing coffee shop operators and entrepreneurs. And on top of the access you have to talk with wonderful vendors of all sorts of different services and equipment and products, you also have a great lineup of educational content, trainings and lectures, workshops, panel discussions, and then there's a ton of community that happens during these trade shows. And Coffee Fest takes place 4 times every year. Now, the last show to attend, 2023, is going to be in Orlando in November. So go to coffeefest.com, and when you register for general admission, you can use the code KEYS, K-E-Y-S. That'll get you 50% off your registration when you use the code KEYS for general admission with Coffee Fest. And I will be there in Orlando giving some talks and judging latte art and saying hello to you. I have a booth, and we'll be doing these interviews as well at my booth, and that'll be a fresh episode after Orlando as well. So go check them out over at coffeefest.com. It's really worth your time, and it'll be a real asset to your team, your career, in your business. All right, well, let's get right into it. Here are the first couple of interviews for part 1 of our live on the show floor from Coffee Fest series. And that's going to be starting off with Kenneth Davids, and then we're going to be talking with Madeleine Longoria Garcia. So starting with Kenneth Davids, he has been involved in the coffee industry since the early 70s. He is a legend in the coffee industry, and he's published 3 books on coffee, including the influential Home Roasting, Romance and Revival, which is now in its 2nd edition, and Coffee, A Guide to Buying, Brewing and Enjoying, which has sold nearly 250,000 copies in 5 editions. And his latest book is 21st Century Coffee, A Guide, and it is an unprecedentedly thorough survey of specialty coffee in all of its aspects. It is at once authoritative yet engaging. Ken's workshops and seminars on coffee sourcing, evaluation, and communication have been featured at professional coffee meetings on 6 continents. He is Professor Emeritus of Critical Studies at the California College of the Arts in San Francisco. And in 1996, he was awarded a Special Achievement Award for outstanding contributions to coffee literature by the Specialty Coffee Association of America. And so Kenneth is just an incredible asset to our community for all of these years, since the 70s, and tracking coffee's progress. You might also know about his company, coffeereview.com, that has been an incredible force for evaluation of coffee, and so many roasters have had their coffees featured and reviewed on that website. And so this last interview we did with Kenneth was episode 349, talking about the book 21st Century Coffee. Now at Coffee Fest, I got to catch up with Kenneth and actually meet him for the first time face to face, which is pretty cool, to talk about his take on what's going on in coffee right now and what we need to be prepared for as coffee retailers. Like, what should we be preparing our staff for? How should we embrace the consumer's understanding of coffee at this juncture in specialty coffee? We talk about special processing methods, accessibility, and all sorts of fun stuff. So let's get right to it. Here now is my live on the show floor of Coffee Fest Anaheim, California interview with Kenneth Davids. All right, Kenneth, welcome back to Keys to the Shop. How are you?
I'm doing great, Chris. I'm very happy to be here.
I'm really glad to have you in person. This is the first time we've met in person.
That's true.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of photos, but
So you're here at Coffee Fest, and what are you presenting? What are we experiencing with you this weekend?
Well, I'm talking about how the industry, the third wave particular, that segment of the industry is changing, I think, rapidly. And in particular, I'm interested in how what I think of as the fundamental appeals of specialty coffee a couple of them I think have to be understood in a different way because of these changes.
Like, what would be an example of one of the most obvious changes that's changed everything?
Well, I think that the experiments and changes with processing method and variety are mainly what I'm interested in. I'm also
Okay.
interested in other words, a lot of people think of these anaerobic fermentation as a fad, something that'll go away. They
Oh,
can not pay attention to it, but I don't feel that's true. I mean, I think the richness of producer innovation is not going to change. It's
okay.
going to proliferate. And I think it's part of a larger change in a sense of product innovation happening more in producing countries and less in consuming countries.
Oh, okay.
So if we look back at the last 30, 40 years, you'll see that the product innovations have been mostly innovations by roasters and retailers. The dark roasting, for me, was a clear differentiation ploy. It was not a ploy, but it was
Yeah.
an act on the part of Alfred Pete and people who followed after him to differentiate in a dramatic way specialty coffee from ordinary coffee. So Alfred bought much better coffees than Farmer Brothers or anybody else, but the normal consumer, I don't think, would know the difference. So by dark roasting, this makes him sound Machiavellian. It's not at all. I think it's just happened. By the darker roasting, made alerted to consumers that this is something different.
Yes, it
And
signaled like there's
right,
something happening here.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. And they can taste it. And then, of course, I think the popularity of espresso is, again, something that's innovated in consuming regions.
Yes.
And it's, in fact, not to the advantage, obviously, of most producers, because you use less coffee and you don't focus on the coffee. And there's this single origin espresso movement, which is very nice. But so I think what's happening now with first, we had natural processing, and then the honey processing, which doesn't seem to have as much legs as natural. And now with the anaerobic ferment, variations on that. And I think that direction is not going to go away.
Yes.
I mean, there are problems. I could discuss them at length. The fact that only better educated or better connected producers can take advantage of this and so
Yes.
on. That's perhaps another subject. But nevertheless, just don't see it changing.
And those are signifiers of the next kind of not wave, but movement of coffee, so to speak, that signifies this is specialty coffee, or there's something different happening here, and the power shifting to farmers is pretty significant. That there's, I guess, arguably more power now in the hands of the farmer based on what they can do with their coffee than there ever has been. I mean, people are still being taken advantage of in the industry, but new experimental processing methods and other things allow them to write their own story rather than have it be dictated the other way around, right?
Right, exactly. They're planting new varieties too, or finding new varieties that they may have in their locales that now they're like pink bourbon, they're differentiating. And I think all of that gives the producers more real say in what's happening. I mean, there's a lot of partnering, obviously, a lot of exporters help facilitate that, roasters help facilitate that. but nevertheless, it's coming. The actual innovation is coming from producers.
Yeah.
And also, I think, as we all know, the producing countries are turning into consuming countries, and this must have a big impact. I mean, the problem, of course, is that, say, in Brazil, where I often stay, have a little place there, you can find magnificent specialty coffees, but they're all Brazilian.
Yeah.
You can't import it. This is very characteristic, so it limits these industries. But nevertheless, I think it gives more power to the producers because they have a new and different market.
And when we talk about the long-term impact of that on the average consumer who interacts with coffee, where previously we were depending on the marketing of roasting companies, and we always will in some regard, that we're going to be presented with different options across the industry. What is the consumer of, say, 10 years from now, when these experimental processing methods are truly and well established as normative? How does that impact the consumer? And is there stuff that we need to do as roasters and retailers to really embrace that?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's one I don't have a simple answer for. But
Nothing is simple.
I think because one of the things that interests me is how it's changes in variety and processing method really have blown out of the water generalizations about how certain origins taste certain ways. So we often would present to consumers or to newbies in the industry, well, you can expect a Guatemala coffee to tend to taste this way and so on. Well, certainly with Central America, that's not true anymore. And we did El Salvador cupping at Coffee Review recently, and I think about only 30 or 40% of the coffees we received were washed process and would fit a traditional expectation of a soft, delicate El Salvador. Of course, there's lots of exceptions. I mean, Kenya is stubbornly Kenya. Colombia has gone both ways. They've preserved their classic Colombia profile throughout, but they're allowing people to experiment, and these amazing coffees are erupting out of Colombia.
Yeah. Is this going to confuse consumers?
Yes.
in that we are yes.
Sorry.
Our consumers generally confused? Yes, also. But if I am saying I want a cup of coffee, it's easier for me in some ways to say I just like Guatemalan coffee.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
But now I have to say, well, I want it from that family in Guatemala, or that cooperative. And are we telling customers that they have to make such granular decisions, or is there a way to simplify what is turning to be more granular in a way that still benefits the farmer but makes it easy for consumers?
I think the granular approach is tricky because there isn't the kind of brand continuity and volume. So I think what I suggest and what I do in my latest book is to try to just educate consumers in the simplest way about, I say, what affects the cup that you're drinking. It's the variety of the tree, it's the processing method,
Yes.
and it's the growing altitude.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing in the air in any of these countries, nor anything, no matter how sometimes people guess, in the soil. It's in other words, these types, Kenya tastes like Kenya because it's grown from 4 varieties only.
Yeah.
And it's grown at a high elevation, of course, and it's processed in a very, very consistent way. So therefore, that makes it a Kenya. But if we had a anaerobic Kenya, it would not taste like a Kenya. So I just say there are just 3 things. There's the tree variety, there's a processing method, and if you want to be concerned about it, elevation. And where I think people, when I suggest this, where retailers get concerned is the question of variety, because there's so many varieties. But I think this is, again, a little tricky, but you can say they're the normal varieties, the varieties we're used to.
Yes.
And then there are exceptional tasting varieties. Most of them from Ethiopian seed trees, but anyhow, they're exceptional, like Gesha, like Pink Bourbon. So you just maybe compartmentalize them into two.
Yeah. Okay. Because we're so addicted to this idea of optimization and streamlining our process, we're very heavy in marketing. We don't like the idea of having this colicky phase of getting used to new language,
Right.
and new process, because it used to be that you'd have an explanation to a customer about what washed, and that you still do, but it's not as hard anymore, because a lot of people actually who know a little bit about coffee might know that automatically, and so there's a turnover that has to happen in order for people to get that in their lexicon, right?
Right.
Yeah. And wine does that too, though. I mean, we're very familiar with different types of wine we like, and that's a lot more granular
Right.
than we make it with coffee.
Right. I mean, people are, from wine, they're used to the idea of variety. So that's, and on the other hand, in wine, there's not much attention paid publicly to how the grapes are turned into wine.
Right.
So that's something that's peculiar to coffee. But it's difficult, but not overwhelming. But I don't know what else to do, because people will feel, I guess I think people tend to, I think some consumers will compartmentalize already. They say, well, this is a regular coffee. This is what no matter where it's from. And this is anaerobic, and this sucker, whatever they think, it either sucks or it's splendid
it's
and
great,
sweet and wonderful. And, I like naturals because they're sweet and chocolatey. So there's some compartmental, and then against those atypical types, perhaps, is the standard, what they expect. So I think that would be one way of attempting to approach it. In other words, this is unfair, of course, to traditional types.
Okay.
But you could say, well, this is where you can expect a really outstanding cup of the kind that you're used to, and these are unusual for various reasons, variety above all, processing method.
Yeah. You as a roaster will bring in a limited number of variations of processing and in origins. So you have to choose which ones you really want to champion to your customers. So I imagine in order for those farmers to be successful, they need us to pay attention to what our customers are going to respond well to. That's hard to do when it feels like when you use the word, these are emerging or experimental. It's not necessarily experimenting on the customer, or is it? We'll see if you like this or not, and then maybe we'll order more of it.
Yeah, we'll run it up the flagpole and see if anybody salutes. Right. So I think there's a certain amount of that, but I think roasters recognize that people like it when there's a new taste and it's startling. When we did a anaerobic cupping, we had about 90, and I corresponded with a lot of the roasters about the coffees. And several said, well, what's great about anaerobics is that people can talk about it. Some of the flavor notes are so distinctive that they can describe them. And with other coffees, they have trouble describing them. So this gives them a kind of a sense of power. And
it's an excitement that, if we're honest, all of us have a story of when we first tasted a coffee and it was distinguished from other coffees because of something relatively easy to identify. For a lot of people, it was like the Harar horse, Ethiopia blueberry bomb.
Blueberry.
And when I used to do cuppings, and when I was a very young trainer, I'd be like, all right, here's a dark roasted Sumatra, and then here's this blueberry Ethiopia, and then watch people's just brains start imploding. Right. Yeah, it's simplistic. Okay. It's not as nuanced as, a veteran coffee person might want it to be, but that excitement feels like it would fuel their journey through coffee. Like it would make them more
Right.
dedicated to being curious.
Right.
Yeah.
I think so. The anaerobic profile, when they get it right, when they really nail it, is very startling. And I remember the first time at Coffee Review we got one, we sent it back. We said, we can't review it. We don't know where to start. We don't have language here. When we had 90, a lot of them were not, they didn't have that special anaerobic taste.
Yeah.
But a lot of them did, and it was an adventure for sure. And an adventure that I personally didn't always care for.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people do. The other thing I think will happen practically, this is not about the communication piece, but is that with naturals, when we started getting a lot of naturals at Coffee Review, you know, a lot of them were, they had the blueberry, yes, but they also had a little rotten funk underneath it in the back. Yeah, and kind of alcohol breath thing. We had a bit of struggle with them, representing them and trying to pick out which we thought were better or more likely to be liked. But the industry has changed and they've gotten better at them. So I don't know, at least the sampling we get, we tend to get very few of those. And so the industry is discriminating. The farmers know how to handle the drying in terms of pacing it right, getting the right profile so it doesn't dry out and get nutty or get too funky, fruity.
Right, okay.
And I think probably the same thing may happen with anaerobic. So these that taste like cologne, for example, you know, we maybe not get those anymore.
That's great. Yeah, I can't. I just get this Stetson thought in my mind, like it like when you're in high school. Like this coffee smells like I was in high school putting on cologne for the first time. That's a real great way to win a customer. Wow. But you bring up a great point about the infrastructure of being able to make a more successful experiment and be more bold in your experimentations because farmers have more tools at their disposal. And I suppose there's more feedback between roasters and producers that would help that along. And there have been times where I've tasted coffees and I have thought, I don't like this processing method and I would rather never buy it again. But it evolves into something that I might actually like because people didn't have the same knee-jerk reaction I did who are actually doing the experiments. They gave it some time.
Right.
Yeah.
I think so. And I think that this is going to play out. I think that there's a good matrix of communication at this edge of specialty, the high-end edge of specialty, and I think that it will resolve, each new step will resolve, but I think it's good for the industry that it, and of course it never would have happened if we hadn't started roasting coffee medium roast. If you're still doing dark, you couldn't even tell some of this stuff. It's just part of, it's really an evolution of what we call a third wave, I think.
Beautiful.
It's a kind of a working out of the potential. Smaller lots and much more sophisticated insider public for it. So I like it, but
I like coffee too. Yeah.
I'll qualify.
Yeah, exactly. No, I love
changes.
that. The evolution and tapping into the potential of what's there. It is fascinating after, as long as this has been a subject of great interest of, specialty coffee's potential. There seems to be new things popping up, and that's what keeps it exciting. I'm really glad that we have people like you championing these things and coming to shows like this to help us understand where we are in history, where we've been and where we're going. So, Kenneth, I really appreciate you being here. Where can we learn more? I mean, it feels obvious where we can learn more about, Coffee Review and your book, but give us the website and we can go from there.
Well, of course, is my book, which I crafted deliberately to sort of educate on some of the subjects we're talking about.
Yes.
All of the country entries really have the traditional profiles associated with the country described, and then the various experiments. I go into considerable detail, I think lucid detail, but considerable detail on processing and varieties and so on. So my book is available on Amazon as usual, and can get an autographed copy from me at KennethDavidsCoffee.com.
Nice.
KennethDavidsCoffee.com.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I'd like to say, too, that a coffee review, whenever something's new and breaking, we'll do a report and we'll taste sometimes as many as 100 coffees, far too many, and report on that development. We had one on anaerobic. We're having one on flavored anaerobics. I mean, that's not right, but fruit. They add fruit to the fermentation.
Yeah, it's like infused in there. Yeah.
Fruit fermentation.
Yeah, very interesting.
Natural fruit fermentation.
Yes.
Very controversial because people in green coffee competitions feel it's cheating and so on.
Yeah.
But we're going to cover that. We have the one on new varieties coming up. Both of those coming up still this year.
Excellent.
So we try to stay on it.
Exciting times.
CoffeeReview.com.
Thank you, Kenneth. I appreciate your time.
Well, I appreciate this, Chris. Thank you.
All right. All right. Well, I hope that you really enjoyed that conversation with Kenneth, an amazing person, an amazing mentor to us all, and somebody who is still a super contributor in the specialty coffee world with his new book, 21st Century Coffee. And I'm really grateful to have gotten a chance to sit down with him at Coffee Fest. Meeting a legend in coffee is always such a joy. So thank you very much, Kenneth, for sitting down with me on the show floor. If you want more information about the new book, 21st Century Coffee, a guide, you can go to KennethDavidsCoffee.com. This is where you can find all the information you need to know about Kenneth and about his books and more. So KennethDavidsCoffee.com. Now we are going to go right into our next interview, which is with Madeleine Longoria Garcia. Madeleine is an owner of Pacific Coffee Research, which is a coffee roastery, educational center, and consulting company based in Kailua Kona, Hawaii. She has worked in coffee since 2010, filling a myriad of roles from barista to cafe manager to coffee picker. With Hawaii as her home since 2014, she is active in the local coffee community as a committee chair with the Hawaii Coffee Association and board member of the Synergistic Hawaii Agriculture Council. Madeleine believes access to information and education is at the core of building a more resilient coffee community. And in our conversation we had on the show floor of Coffee Fest, Madeleine and I talked about quality assessments in coffee, and specifically things about the Q certification and simply going through quality control assessments within your own business and how to set QC up in-house. What are the essential elements for that instruction style and approaches? What are the benefits of doing that? So it's kind of a discussion around existing certification and approaches to quality assessment, as well as how you can take what you do in your own backyard, in your own coffee shop, and create a QC program that will give you better quality and more consistency. And Madeleine has a lot of great things to offer us today that I think you can apply to your business. And so I was super grateful to get an opportunity to sit down with Madeleine and meet her at Coffee Fest. It was an awesome conversation. I hope you agree. So let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation with Madeleine Longoria Garcia of PCR in Hawaii. Madeleine, welcome to Keys to the Shop on the show floor.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to finally meet you. As I was saying before, I hear a lot about your educational prowess, and your reputation precedes you in the coffee industry. So you're teaching here at Coffee Fest about the Q. You're teaching about quality control programs in your cafe, in your roastery. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how you kind of got to the place of having this be your focus? Like you're quality control focused in your career right now. How did that happen?
Oh, okay. So I've been working in coffee since 2010, as many of us start as a barista in a cafe. And I don't know why, but I was just always very interested in the training and education aspect. By the time I became a manager of that cafe, I had built a whole like training program, had made like required training things for new hires and all of this stuff. And I really just started diving down that rabbit hole. And what kept feeding me throughout the years of working in coffee was like new learning opportunities. Who else can I learn from? What classes can I take? Who can I kind of like work alongside to learn new things? And I think because of that too, I kept being placed in these roles of like, oh, you're going to train people now.
Right.
You're working in this cafe. You've only worked here for like 3 months, but you're going to train these people now because you like it and like...
You're passionate about it, right? Yeah.
And I really just started modeling my training programs off of how I was trained by other people too, and the different programs I would go through, and would kind of like choose what worked well for me, what I felt was, I don't know, I guess like the most impactful and important for folks, and then moving on from there. And so looking at like education, then that just really became for me like the driving force. And in Pacific Coffee Research in this company, it's like that was always at the core of like why this company was founded. And it was because there was a lack of resources available to the coffee community in Hawaii of educational resources, and whether that was for cafe level or even farm level stuff. And so that all started just like melding together in all sorts of different ways. And education and like quality services and quality analysis, again, for farmers, because those services didn't really exist. They didn't, or like an outside party wasn't available to do that. Or if you wanted to, it was a consultant that was maybe outside of a grower's price range, right?
Yeah.
So,
okay. So you're bringing this educational thing, with Pacific Coffee Research full circle, or at least you're taking the two ends of the supply chain, so to speak, and kind of providing education that provides understanding for both parties, I suppose. And so how long has Pacific Coffee Research been an entity, and how? So
we celebrate 6 years on August 10th.
Hey,
so
congrats.
Coming up here very soon.
Wow, that is really soon.
Yeah.
What is it, the 6th today?
It's like the 6th,
Yeah, okay, cool. I don't know. I looked at my watch. There's nothing on there. So that's really great, 6 years. And now you've had the opportunity through doing that to interact with a lot of people across the supply chain. And what would you say you're most passionate about making sure people understand when it comes to understanding both sides of the supply chain, farmer to roaster, or a retailer, or in retailer to farmer?
Totally. One is that it is all connected, right? There is this interconnectedness throughout the entire supply chain, right? And from a roaster's perspective, kind of looking back at the grower, having some understanding for the resources available, the information available to the folks before them. I feel like this has been talked about a lot, at least when I was kind of starting in the industry, is this whole idea of, the quote unquote knowing roaster visiting a grower and telling them, no, you should do it this way.
Oh, yeah.
And the grower may be trying that and maybe it not going well. And so I think from a roasting perspective of like understanding where the grower is coming from, where they're at, what is available to them, the resources in all different senses of that word, and seeing how, if we want to see it from the roaster's perspective, we want to see something maybe change or improve in quality, there has to be a symbiotic relationship with that. And that's really, at the end of the day, I think what a lot of growers just want to know is like, if I do this thing, or if I kind of like start experimenting, you're going to support me with this financially.
You're gonna be committed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're ensuring me like I have a market for this now. And maybe there is even some sort of deeper relationship of that. Like let's work on this together and figure out how we can create something together. And I think a lot of growers want to just have that reassurance. understanding that roasters and retailers are they're trying to ensure as well that they can sell the product. Maybe everything that a grower produces is not going to fit their market. And I think how this symbiotic relationship can work, and this is truly like what we do with some folks who we work with, is like, that's not right for our market, but you know what? I think this other person might be interested in that coffee. So like, I can't sell that one, but this person might have
good reference, like a referral program.
And like not being afraid of that. I think a lot of roasters are like, I don't want to give away my supply chain. I don't want to share this farm with somebody else. But it's like, not everything they produce is going to fit your market.
We're very possessive.
Yeah. If it's good for the grower because they're going to be able to sell their supply and sell everything they have and not have anything warehousing for a longer period of time, like, why not?
It used to be in the day that, and there are still the old guard, maybe secret blends, where you can't, I don't want to tell you where I get my coffee because then you're going to put me out of business.
Right.
And that's baloney, you're right? That's not true. But now it feels like it's moved to some other place in the supply chain. Like, I'm not going to, like you said, I'm not going to share where I get my, source my El Salvadorian coffee from because then you're going to source from them and all this stuff. But it seems to me like that insecurity that people have may be born from some kind of a knowledge that on their end, they're not quite as in control of their quality and delivery, and their experience is not as unique as they think it is. So they're relying on the source to be the differentiator and not so much what they do with what they get from the source.
Yeah.
And so that kind of brings us to the idea of being a professional quality assessor. I mean, some people go into Q grading and they use that for the green side of things, whether they're importing or they're just purchasing coffee for themselves as a roaster. Talk to us a little bit about how these certifications, especially something like the Q, can actually help us take what we receive from our partners on the farm and not only do it justice, but give us some security that we are adding value to the coffee.
Right. The Q program, CQI, was founded really primarily with the grower in mind. Originally, that was at the core. It was to evaluate a coffee's quality to then give the grower essentially some negotiation power, because they understand then this is the quality, so the value of this product has now increased because this is the quality. And so that really was at the core, and it kind of changed into roasters want it, baristas want it. It's like this cool kind of a certification thing to have. Yeah. I was just having this conversation with somebody last night. Like, I tell people all the time, this is probably not for you. Like, when are you going to use this in your work? Unless you maybe have aspirations or interest in doing something that requires like QA, quality analysis, training. But there's a lot of people who just kind of want it for fun, Yeah. That's a big investment to have just for fun. It's over $2,000 to take this course.
It's like having a doctorate of poetry. Like, I'm not going to necessarily, it's fun, it's great, probably, but,
Yeah. So what I see, though, the Q, like I said, I think if we're able to continue to use it in this way that it was originally intended, of communicating with the grower, or the grower having an understanding of the quality and thereby the value of their coffee, again, it's negotiation power. It gives them the ability to kind of like stand a little bit stronger in what they're asking for.
Give a little pushback.
Yeah. At the same time, I do, like, in my mind, have this like conflicting thing of like, why is quality the only like reason why we're valuing something higher, right?
Yeah.
So I want to like kind of back that up with saying, I think from the get-go, every farm needs to be run and managed as a business where you're covering your costs and you're making the profit margin that you need to be making. And having something that is scoring a higher score then is just that added value onto it. It is not the base. It should not be the sole way to make more money.
It's one aspect in many that is part of the value proposition of that coffee. And you mentioned commitment and long-term commitment. I would guess that mutually beneficial relationships over time produce better coffee because you're looking out for each other's interests. But it does seem like we are more like, you better compete for our dollar, and we're going to just kind of show up and give you the test. to see how you did, which seems a little passive aggressive to do.
Yeah, definitely.
So
yeah. So using this as like a QC tool, right, for roasters and even baristas, right? You want to ensure too, though, like from one lot to the next, is this what we expect? Is this consistent? Okay, one harvest season to the next harvest season, you kind of have to expect variation.
Yeah.
There's so many things that are out of every human being's control. But knowing, are we at least in the same range of what we need from this coffee?
Yes.
And at Pacific Coffee Research, we do internal QC every week. We're tasting a lot of the same coffees every week. And we have the benefit with all of our Hawaii grown coffees. We know these growers personally. I can call them up, whatever. And we've had it where, oh, shoot, this time we picked up on a defect in this cupping. And like, that sucks. And you know what? It's the only time it's ever happened, but I'm going to let the grower know, hey, just want to let you know, this happened in this lot. Not a big deal, but maybe you need to look into XYZ, make sure this thing is cleaned, make sure, like, if you're tracking data on your processing, did you see any like anomalies kind of pop up in these dates of this lot?
Right.
And that then arms them with information and tools and data that they can then hopefully take and turn into a more consistent product too.
This scenario that you just gave, I mean, in another scenario, somebody might say, we found a defect, see you later.
Yeah.
And we're going to, but you put it in context and you leverage the relationship, and obviously, you know, better things can happen for that grower. When people give lip service to the idea of we want better for the growers, that commitment is so important.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when it comes to quality analysis within our own shops and roasteries, we can hold ourselves to very stringent standards. Now, truly, I think most people listening to this are making their money off of very milky and sugary beverages.
Yep.
And so the margin of error in your coffee, especially from origin, might be wider than you like to think. So how do we arrange a proper quality control program, quality assessment within our businesses that it serves our needs as well as our farming partners' needs?
Yeah. In my barista trainings, whenever I train baristas, I tell people, this is the recipe, this is the goal. We're giving you a range, right? Like the range for your dose in, a range for your dose out, range for your extraction time. And maybe it's a small range. And also have an understanding that, like, we're tasting these espressos at the short end, at the long end, right in the middle.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, this is like the ideal at this exact specification. But you know what? If that person's ordering a vanilla latte, they're probably not going to taste if your extraction is like 2 seconds too long.
Yeah.
Outside of this range. And like, that's okay. That's totally okay. But also understanding the person who's coming in and getting that double espresso, you want to give them the best experience possible with that double espresso, because they're tasting, it's the raw experience of that. They're tasting everything.
And for that reason, you're just kind of always dialing in. And that's what a lot of operators are afraid of. They're like, if we serve this shot, and you're not saying serve a bad shot. It's if it's outside of your nerdy little parameters as a barista professional or whatever, it's probably going to taste fine. I think Chris Baca had this whole video about just serve it, you know. And it was so great. But then also you're still dialing in. You're not just letting yourself off the hook.
Right.
Yeah.
Take that information and be like, okay, well, the next one I'm going to make this tiny adjustment, and now I'm making this tiny adjustment. I'm not just throwing that one down the drain and now pulling a whole other shot, doing a purge dose, like doing all of this stuff. Like, no. Your entire shift, you should kind of be like monitoring and not afraid to make a small adjustment when it starts to go out of spec.
So these shoulds and these things that we're saying people should be doing come in the form of how we've taught them to do things. So that's the program. Right. So what is the structure of a program look like that accomplishes good things in the shop, in the roastery?
I think it all comes down to arming people with the tools and the knowledge. There are many cafes that I've walked into for a barista training, and the baristas tell me, oh, my manager told me to never adjust that. And I'm like, oh, that is the wrong thing to tell people, you know?
Yeah.
How do we ensure quality is by making sure people know how to make a quality beverage. And they need to have the information and tools to do so, to make adjustments, because it's necessary. There are too many factors that are changing throughout an entire shift.
Yeah.
So I think from the manager perspective, like having an investment to train people and also having the trust to let them do the thing. Sure, having those little checks, like don't make it a big scary, like I'm quality checking your espresso right now, but like going up to the counter, be like, hey, can you just pull me a double espresso so I can start my day?
Yeah.
you know, and see how it is. And if it's not great, again, I don't think it needs to be this huge, big, dramatic thing of just like, hey, I noticed, what were your specs on that? It was tasting a little off today compared to yesterday.
Sure.
Did
Yeah.
we change something up? You know?
And being curious like that, I suppose, as a matter of just default, is hard to do because you have to accept that if you find something, you're going to have to do something about it, or you're just going to have to stuff it down and ignore it, which,
Right.
That's why a lot of people end up never changing gaskets and stuff. They're like, I don't want to pull the fridge out. I don't want to see what's under there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you just have to, too many metaphors here, but just rip the Band-Aid off, and embrace what you have there so that you can address it. So that all the work you do at Pacific Coffee Research and any other entity that is about quality control as well as just improvement on the end of the farmers, once it reaches the hopper of a espresso machine, it's scary what happens to that coffee.
Yeah.
Because of that lack of curiosity, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And I think, too, this is something, and this kind of scares people, too, when I say this, but I do this, again, in all of my barista trainings. I tell them, you are the last step, and you can either make it or break it. And you can either give these coffee drinkers a great experience and pay homage to all of the work before it got into that hopper.
Yep.
Or you cannot care and not give that coffee drinker a great experience, and you know what, they're gonna think that coffee just doesn't taste good
Yes.
when you just didn't do the job.
You didn't do it justice.
Yeah.
And there's so much there. Caring for your staff. A lot of staff feel just browbeat, and there's a lot there. It's a whole nother podcast, but
Yeah.
the idea that you're critiquing things is also somewhat of a problem. Because the quality assessment is not just like, what can we find wrong with this coffee? Like cupping for defect versus cupping for nuance, right? How do you celebrate? Like when you taste really great coffee, I'm sure you tell the farmers about this coffee, right?
Yeah.
So they get a kick out of that. Like if all you did was be like, oh, there's something wrong here, something wrong there, I don't think it would add much to the equation, would it?
No, there has to be both,
Yeah.
right? And this is the same, I mean, any kind of like human relationship, you have to give positive, not just negative, and so that same grower, that same farm, where that one time we tasted a defect in their coffee when we were doing our QC cupping, my business partner and I just had dinner with them at their home and talked about like what the next year looks like, talked about like what can we do to strengthen this relationship, like continue this relationship. We are so happy with your coffee. We've been so happy with your coffee since we started buying it. And like, there's a reason why we buy your coffee throughout the entire year, And I think that you have to make an intentional effort to have those conversations too, where it's not also just about like, your coffee's tasting great, this lot is tasting awesome, but also like you're doing an awesome job across the board, and like this is what we love about working with you. And it's not just the quality of your coffee, but it's like who you are, how you communicate with us, and the relationship we're able to have, where we're like sitting down at your home and having dinner, with your whole family. And it's and like that's awesome. And those are the kinds of relationships that I think even it shouldn't just be like the effort only with growers and roasters, but like roasters checking in with your cafes, And I don't know. I just think that is something that it can get so forgotten because we're in the day-to-day hustle of running a business, doing our jobs. but like as simple as like sending an email of congratulating somebody because it was their second birthday of opening their business, or like their kid just graduated from college or high school or something, and like saying something and knowing those things about your customers and your vendors,
It's such a forgotten art that it feels awkward.
Yeah.
Because to take ourselves seriously as professionals means to find problems. I love that story of just this communal moment that you had, and any critique that follows that, I'm thinking about, well, what did Madeleine say to me?
Mm-hmm.
Like in the last 6 conversations, it's coming from the person who I trust, who has my best in mind.
Yeah.
And if operators of cafes or roasteries or wholesalers to their clients, like you're saying, did the same thing, it'd be a much nicer place out there. But again, in fact, I said this to somebody the other day, that your security as a professional can't be based on what you don't like. It has to be, what are you celebrating? Does anybody know what you like? Like, I didn't like that coffee or that shot. Great. But what's the opposite of that?
Yeah.
And some people are stumped about that. So making room for the positive in your quality control, I suppose, is part of that.
And rewarding those coffees. I think that's something too I see so often with cuppers, is that you're really looking for an extreme coffee to reward it. And it's like, this is a delicious, balanced, sweet coffee. Why are you giving it an 82? Like, what are you expecting? And this is the thing that like I've been taught by people who have trained me, is asking the question, what more does this coffee need? And if you can't answer that question, but you're still scoring it pretty low, then you have to reevaluate the way that you are approaching your quality evaluation.
And the problem is you.
Yeah, you have to like figure out, if I can't answer that question of like, what more do I need from this coffee, or what is lacking in this coffee, and you're like, nothing, why is it an 85? Why aren't we boosting that score higher?
Yeah, and surely you're still learning how to evaluate coffee yourself better, and leave room for you to be wrong.
Yeah.
Right? Because that score, especially when you're in a position like you are, and some other people they go to cuppings that publish scores, and then people interpret those numbers to mean way more than they actually mean.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because 82, and you and I have both had quote unquote lower scoring coffees that are just amazing coffees. So in some weird way, I guess maybe the underdog, if there maybe people will be shooting for those 82s, we're like, we want to get in that whole, the roasters that love those low scoring ones.
I mean, in cupping, in the Q program, you reward complexity, you reward nuance, right? And so I think though we need to make sure that we're framing that in a sense of like, well, if there are only these chocolatey and nutty notes, that doesn't make it a bad coffee.
Makes it a good coffee.
It makes it a good coffee. We have chocolatey and nuttiness. Like, that's good.
You guys
people
like chocolate and nuts, don't you?
Yeah, people love that. That's something that I remind people a lot of. It's something that I like to think about a lot too when I am cupping an exceptional coffee and I look at how I'm evaluating it. I ask myself that question a lot, like, what else is this coffee missing? What does it need? And if I can't really answer that, then I'm usually like, how the way that I've evaluated and scored this coffee reflect the fact that I can't answer this question?
I feel like that can be applied to so many things. It's like, why am I not happy with my staff?
Yeah.
What would you suggest they do better? I don't know.
Right.
Well then. Well, this has been really fun. I appreciate you sitting down with me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. How can we learn more about Pacific Coffee Research and the work you do there?
So you can head to our website. You can just go to pcr.coffee, and that'll take you to pacificcoffeeresearch.com, which is just a little bit of a long website to type out. And our social media handles are pcr.coffee pretty much across the board. Sign up for our newsletter. I write them. So you're getting emails from me. And yeah, that's kind of the way to keep track of what we're up to.
Beautiful. Well, I hope your presentations go well, your trainings
Thank you.
This weekend. And thank you again.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris.
Well, I hope that you all enjoyed that conversation, and hopefully you will be inspired to take this information and then start the first steps of an in-house quality control program. And now this is something that we talked about people doing with roasting and certainly with training, and everybody has the ability to take your standards, your high standards for coffee, and create a program with content and rhythms and training protocols that will allow your coffee bar to get to the next level and will empower your baristas and your managers and everyone to do their jobs well. And I think this would be the best possible outcome. You can also pursue other certifications for quality assessment if you want to pursue the Q, if you want to get other kind of accreditations. Personally, I think if you're not going to pursue putting together quality control programs in your own cafe for your ecosystem there, then that's something you should start with. If you're not going to do that, then I wouldn't say that pursuing accreditations is going to be much of a use to your business. And so go ahead, take the first step to do that. Huge thank you to Madeleine for being on the show and for sharing your wisdom with us. If you want to learn more about what Madeleine does with Pacific Coffee Research, then go ahead and visit the website pcr.coffee, and you can find all you need to know right there, pcr.coffee. And with that is the end of today's episode. This is part 1 of 2 parts of live interviews from the show floor of Coffee Fest in Anaheim, California. And I hope that you're going to join us for the next 2 conversations on part 2, where we talk with Steve Chang, founder and owner of Copa Vida Coffee in Southern California, and also John Ferguson of Coffee Tech Central. We're going to be covering the best practices for starting a successful coffee shop. And then with John, we're going to be talking about buying used equipment and what you need to know about that. So there's some really good content coming up. Stay tuned for part 2. Go check out Coffee Fest, also coffeefest.com, if you're interested in participating in these shows. The next one coming up is in Orlando, and I hope to see you there. Thanks, everybody, and as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.